of me being a distinguished designer is a part of this story. And it's not just a title, it's a corporate appointment within IBM. And I've been an IBMer for 17 years, and I've spent those 17 years trying to become the best designer I could be at IBM and eventually driving the design program across IBM as it is. And when you're given this appointment, they give you a corporate mission to go with it. You don't get to choose it, they just give it to you. So, April 2016, I'm given my appointment, and they say to me, hey, we want you to design or to define what it means to design for AI across the company. At which point, you have to take a very deep breath because that's 400,000 people plus all the people that we serve, and how to design for something that still is lacking form or understanding is kind of a challenging thing. So, I thought about, do I go with what I already know? Or do I take it back to the beginning and think about it from a primal place, from where the average person might come from? And after giving it some thought, I decided to take it back to that primal place. I started with how I remember learning about AI, and it started with these two. I remember recalling, even as a 7 year old, if you think about the beginning of that movie, people aren't talking to one another. For the first 5 minutes, it's these two bickering with one another. They have a rapport, there's a relationship there. And then some years pass and you mature, and then everybody gets introduced to their favorite murder bot, and you learn about AI and the dangers of AI unchecked. And then this matures into a slightly more cerebral version of this with this pair from the Matrix debating the nature between human and AI existence. And then just recently, there was a moment in film, back to my roots, that made me shed a tear, I'm not going to lie, where at the tail end of The Last Jedi, BB 8 and Poe are reunited. And it's more like how I greet my dog at the end of every day, head pressed against head, belly rub. And so I thought to myself, well, how do we get to something that looks like that in the future? So I started with what I knew, which is design. And so if you go to the dictionary, design is the purpose, planning, or intent behind an action, fact, or material object. It's nothing to do with Photoshop or font choices or visual design, but it's that purpose, planning, or intent. And despite what some people might tell you, design is not subjective. It is objective because design must solve a specific problem, and it's evaluated at how effective it is at solving that problem. And if we don't solve for the right problem, we're not giving people what they need in order to be successful. Design succeeds when we ask why. So I wound that all the way back to the very beginning. And when it comes to why, it's that human needs don't change. If you know anything about Maslow's hierarchy, this doesn't really change a whole lot. It hasn't changed over the years. But the tools that we design to support these needs change all the time. The pneumatic hammer ostensibly does the exact same thing that the stone wrap hammer does, it just does it better. And that over the course of time, modern tools and technology enable us to do more faster with less friction. But at the end of the day, tools are just enablers. And most people don't really care about their tools. What people care about is that they just want it to work, whatever it happens to be. And in this case, we're talking about AI. So now I'm feeling a little better historically here. The main principles of design don't change. Check. Okay. So then I start asking myself, well, what is AI? So again, I go back to the dictionary. So intelligence is the ability to acquire and apply knowledge and skills through understanding, reasoning, and learning. Artificial intelligence is the simulation of human thought processes and intelligence. And we already know that design is what it is. So therefore, for me, AI design is the purpose, planning, or intent behind simulated human thought processes. Okay, I'm feeling a little better now. So then I think, well, people are going to ask why again. So why use AI? And I don't know about you, but at this point, I've heard just about everything as to why you would want to use AI. From all the cool kids are doing it to it's an imperative at a national or a business level, or my boss said that I have to have some sort of AI in place by the end of the quarter. Sound familiar, right? The reason why we use AI is that we're looking for higher quality outcomes faster than humanly possible. And this is truly netting it out. This is why we want to use AI. So how are we going to do that? To be considered an artificially intelligent system, it has to be capable of understanding, reasoning, learning, and interacting. And if this is the case, then these are the very pillars of human cognition. And if a human, or I mean, if a system can understand, reason, learn, and interact, then we are shifting from the transactional age of computing to the relationship era of computing. And when I mean transactional, I mean that by and large, most of our interactions when it comes to a computer is some form of a text field or an input box and a submit button. It might be a slider, it might be some other form, it might be more than one field. But at the end of the day, that all gets wrapped up, sent to the back end. A transaction occurs and it comes back to the glass. Now we're moving to the relationship era of computing. So now I turn to AI itself and I'm thinking, all right, so how do you design a relationship? Because generally we don't even get taught what a relationship is. We just learn by osmosis. We learn through interacting with our siblings or our parents or our friends, but nobody sits down and says, this is how you're going to design a relationship. You don't design it, you just have it. So I started thinking and I was like, well, how did I meet my best friend? So somebody here in the front, how'd you meet your best friend? Somebody. Anybody. How'd you meet your best friend? School. So I met my best friend at school too. It's been 30 years since I met this joker. We were coming back from a fraternity party, me and my roommate, and he leapt off of a 12-foot retaining wall and flattened us to the ground and said, hey, I have cable TV. Come be my friend. And I thought to myself, well, that's not really how we became friends. There was something else. And then I'm going to flash forward 30 years. I don't know if you've seen these, but these are pepper robots. And peppers are about yay high. And I had read that we were starting to place Watson inside of these pepper robots. And I'm coming around the corner one day, and there in the kitchen of our studio is a brand new pepper robot. It's just sitting like across from one of the banquet tables. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to go make friends with this thing. I'm thinking about R2D2 and C3PO. I'm stoked for this. So I go and I check it out, and as I'm walking up to it, I'm starting to realize, like, what do you say? How do you introduce yourself to a robot? Do you try to shake its hand? Do you pat it on its head? Is there a keyword that I'm supposed to, I don't know what Pepper's version of Hey Siri is. So I sit down across from it, and I'm checking out the industrial design because that's easy, So I'm looking at, the articulated joints, and I'm move up to its head and I'm looking at the optical sensors, its eyes, and it snaps its head around and unfurls its fingers and does this. And I went, no. And I got up and walked away. And I got back to my desk and I was like, why are you freaking out about this? It's just a robot. You've waited for this your whole life. And I realized that there was no rapport and I had no idea how to start that with the robot. So I started doing some research and I stumbled across this piece of work that Dr. Mark Knapp had published in 1978, and it's called the Knapp Relationship Escalation Model. And there's an upward trend to it that starts with initiating and ends with bonding up here. And there is also a side to this in how relationships fall apart. I'm not even going to bother touching that because it's just enough to try to get us to the top of bonding when it comes to working with a machine. So we're going to take those away. I'm going to give you the super abbreviated version of what this actually entails. So, human to human to start with. Initiating is something that you would do at probably what you've done at least 50 times outside today. Hi, how do you do? I'm Adam Cutler. I work at IBM. I'm a designer. Oh, what does that mean? Oh, that's interesting. What do you do? And you have this basic back and forth where you try to suss out what the other person's all about. When we get to experimenting, we start talking about maybe some deeper qualities of ourselves. I like gardening and Norwegian death metal and biking. And so you listen to that other person and you're like, I'm not a good gardener. And Norwegian death metal, I don't even know what that is, but I'm definitely not into that. But I like riding bikes. So you start talking about riding bikes. You're looking for those parts that you can actually communicate around. And now intensifying is when you decide, hey, I actually like hanging out with you enough to say we should probably get together, like maybe next Thursday, and go on a ride together. And integrating is when you say, that was really fun. We should do this every Thursday night. And I'll bring my friends and you bring your friends and we'll go out for beers afterward. And bonding is when you're willing to publicly state, either through selfies and on Facebook or Instagram, but you're saying like this person is somebody who is really important to me. And that bond is only broken through either an infidelity or a falling out of sorts. But once you bond, it's sort of semi-permanent. So trust starts out very low in the initiating phase and grows up towards bonding. For most of us, even those of us who are really conscious about this within AI, none of us are getting above the experimenting line at this point. I'm going to talk about why that is in a sec. None of us in this room would question the fact that birds fly, and they do this by flapping their wings. Also, none of us would argue that planes fly, and we do not ever once question that they don't fly by not flapping their wings, they just fly. So, when we're talking about applying Knapp's relationship model uh, to the human machine side of things, this is where we have to make that analogy. So, when it comes to initiating between a human and a machine, we're talking about establishing the system's tone, personality, and presence. And this is critical because we've seen this play out a number of different ways. And if this helps, picture a conversational agent, not a chatbot because a chatbot is just written, but a conversational agent where there's something deeper at play within that conversation. If it helps to map that, this works, but this also works outside of conversation as well. Establishing the system's tone, personality, and presence lets the human know that there is something deeper than just words on a screen or a recorded voice or a part of a skill. That there is something that if I ask it a question that I think only I would know the answer to, and it answers it right away, I go, well, that's interesting. There's something deeper at play here. So that when we go to experimenting, it's about displaying provable authenticity of the system's interactions. And this is now, you've hooked me with this opening line, and now I'm going to go deeper. I'm going to ask you something that I am positive you will not get. And what we have seen time and time again is that as soon as you have that beneficial first interaction, almost invariably, the second interaction a human will pull is to mess with the AI to try to pull it as far off the path as possible. Because this is what we do to test if this thing is actually real or if that was a parlor trick at the beginning. And we don't do that with each other because we sound weird when we say, like, what's the square root of pi out of nowhere. Uh, so when it comes to intensifying, and like I said, to remind you, most of us have not gotten past this part here with experimenting. But when it comes to intensifying, this is about being able to deliver multi-step context-aware interactions. Most of our everyday AI, or what I call pocket AI, so Siri, Google Assistant, Alexa, they're mostly one and done sort of things. Show me where this restaurant is, get me directions to the house, turn off the lights, that sort of thing. When we have these multi-step context-aware interactions, what we're capable of doing from the machine side is that the machine can make suggestions. It can ask for clarification. It goes back and forth with the human so that it's more natural. And all the while, the machine is getting a better handle on what the intent of the human is. Now, when it comes to integrating, it's about establishing a fully realized AI profile between the system and the human. How many people have an Alexa in their house? Not as many as I would think. How about like Siri or Google Assistant in your pocket? Have you bothered to train Siri? I don't know about Google Assistant. I have an iPhone. Have you bothered to train Siri? Did you know that you can say things like Jody is my wife, Matt is my brother, etc., so that you can say phone my wife and it knows it? Most people don't actually think about training that. But now think about how many different AIs we will eventually end up connecting ourselves to. And how many times are we going to have to train an AI what is important to us? And in some cases, what's important to us is and can be generalized. And this is a way to shortcut going through the bottom steps. If I can just throw my equivalent of a digital passport down and it knows all the things that are important to me, I can start at a much higher level on that chain as long as the system is displaying provable authenticity. There's a chance for us to make a deeper bond faster. And then last but not least is bonding. And I don't know what that looks like. And if anybody ends up deciding that you want to date your operating system, please call me up and let me know. Eventually, we'll hit this at some point, but I don't know when or how or where. But this is something that is incredibly fascinating to me. Part of this is because there's this thing called the pathetic fallacy, and this is where we have a predisposition to assign human qualities to just about anything that's out there. So, show of hands, who's named their car at some point in your life, or begged your laptop to just last like 5 minutes longer, like begging is going to make it, actually happen. We do this because we want to form the relationship. Now, these systems are starting to get the capability to actually give it back to us. And there is a profound sense of responsibility that comes along with it. So now we have to look at what makes the foundation of a healthy relationship between a human and a machine. It's purpose, value, and trust. And purpose is the reason why the user is going to engage with the system. And just like our human relationships, this is going to shift, evolve, and change over the course of time as we learn what each other is capable of doing. Value is what the system provides that tangibly improves the human user's life. This is the reason why they show up. And then there's trust, which is the willingness of the user to invest in an emotional bond with the machine. And honestly, it isn't going to have to take much if we're already naming our cars and talking to Roombas and getting mad at Alexa because she didn't hear us. We don't, why do we get mad at Alexa? Alexa doesn't know any different. So our willingness to put trust in a system is actually right there. It is our responsibility to make sure that we do the right thing when it comes to evolving that trust. Now it's about resetting expectations, because for those of you in the room who are responsible for trying to bring an AI to market or as a part of your business plan, you know that when you talk to the people who aren't involved in AI, you go, I work in AI. And what's going on in their head is, oh, you just pull this thing off the shelf and ta-da, instant PhD. It knows everything about everything. You didn't have to spend 2 years training it just on a small handful of words or a data set. This is what we think we're getting. But in reality, this is what's happening. That you're the parents of a toddler in all of the classic sense, right? That this digital child is impressionable. It learns a lot and it's growing exponentially every day, but it needs your team to constantly stay on it so that it has good values, so that it has proper manners, so that it reacts properly. And this is where we start crossing a little bit into ethics, because this is about where bias comes in. And it's a symbiotic relationship in which, when you pull the AI off the shelf, so to speak, when you're bootstrapping it, it's that we have to augment the machine first. And then the machine helps to augment us. And if we've done this right, it goes on, and we continue to benefit from this cycle. Now, this symbiotic relationship sits inside of an ecosystem. And this ecosystem, again, very basic. It is human, machine, business, and the world all bound together by context. And to spell this out, the human obviously is the person who ultimately benefits from this AI. The system itself, the machine, is the network of embodiments and connections. The business needs, market goals are represented by the business. The world is represented by the data and the external factors that can be fed into this machine so that it can understand the context in the world around it. And the context is the holistic view of a complete human experience. And this includes everything that goes along with the system, as well as everything that goes along with our existence, whether it's domain expertise, physical, mental, emotional. So then IBM comes out with their AI principles, and I'm crossing my fingers because I've just done all this work, and I'm hoping, geez, I hope I didn't run afoul of this. So our principles that guide everybody at IBM is that AI has to augment human intelligence, not replace it. The second one is that maximizes human confidence through transparency. And the third one, yes, is having the skills and knowledge to engage in a relationship with humans. So now I'm feeling really good about this. So what I put up in front of everybody at the end of all of these things is a series of questions that should spur healthy discussion between you and your clients and you and your team. So when it comes to purpose, just simple things like what is your offering? What is the real problem that you're trying to solve for? Where's the opportunity in this offering for AI? Are you doing AI just because it's the hot thing to do right now? When it comes to value, ask yourself, what does this offering do for your users? Can you justify the need for AI? And what kind of data can you feed this to increase the value? And from a trust perspective, are you going to use it to simulate your domain knowledge or as a companion to help with automation or something like that? Do you see a path to a relationship between your users and the system? And are you doing everything that you can to help form that path to a healthy relationship between your users and the system itself? And most importantly, when in doubt, always design for people first and what they value. Everything else falls into line as long as you do this. This is important because all of this, everything that you've heard today and everything that you will hear and everything that you will do, is about us helping them help us become the best versions of ourselves. Thank you.